Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Israel's latest strikes and evacuation orders in Gaza kill dozens, deepening the hunger crisis. Carmaker Stellantis report a loss of $350 million, blaming Trump's tariffs. And Japan swinging to the right. Japan's Prime Minister suffers a devastating election blow as Sanseito make big gains with their Japanese first agenda. Israeli forces have reportedly killed over 90 Palestinians trying to collect aid as hunger and displacement reach critical levels. The UN says Israel's latest evacuation orders have shattered remaining humanitarian lifelines, pushing over 2 million people into just 12% of the territory. Meanwhile, ceasefire talks appear to be faltering, with Hamas warning that the rising death toll and starvation could derail negotiations. Earlier, I asked Juliette Touma, UNRWA's Director of Communications, how the civilian killings were affecting her staff's ability to distribute aid. Take a listen to this.
Look at the current distribution that is managed by the American and Israeli governments is dangerous, is not working, it's taking more lives than saving lives in the Gaza Strip. Starving people are absolutely desperate for some food have been killed. We estimate that it could be up to 1,000 people killed since this new flood mechanism started operating just at the end of May. I woke up this morning to messages, SOS messages from staff who were looking for food for days on end before they could find a bag of flour. Our staff are fainting due to exhaustion and hunger and starvation while they are on duty. So the caretakers themselves need care now in Gaza.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined in the studio by Michael Jabri Pickett, the Managing Director of This Is Dubai, and Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddy Gray, who joins us live from the Isle of Wight. Thank you both for joining us. First, Michael, we'll turn to you. Israel's move that we're seeing today into Deir al-Balah reflects really a military necessity, is what they're saying. But do you think that that's something else as a message that's in there? Because we now are installed ceasefire talks, it seems. So what's the real message behind this?
I think the real message is that Israel can do whatever they want to do. I think that that's the message they want to send consistently to Hamas. And I think that from the Palestinian point of view, you know, it's either death by Israel or death by starvation. Right now, the way that things have operated in Israel for so long is that when Israel says go down to the south, there's the fear that if the Palestinians go down to the south of Gaza, as they've been instructed to do, that maybe that will become a quote-unquote humanitarian city or a concentration camp, as former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said. Or they are usually staying up in cities that were hit today, because those are the ones that are usually the safest. So now there isn't anywhere safe for the Palestinians to go, and they're stuck because they do what they're told and they'll get killed. They stay and they'll get killed, or there's the threat of that. And for me, the solution is if the international community would flood Gaza with aid, with more and more and more trucks. Then the big issue that the Israelis have with Hamas is that they are using the aid to their own devices. And if there's so much aid, then all of a sudden that issue goes away.
Even when we spoke to Juliette from UNRWA earlier, she did once again say that her staff are under increasing pressure in the region. It's almost impossible for them to deliver the aid effectively, but also safely, because every single day there's something new. And I feel that Deir al-Balah was the last safe hold, and also the last operational hospital is located there as well. Without that, surely the humanitarian crisis is just going to deepen. But in the course of the next 24, 48 hours, we'll see it even worse.
But you know, this has gone on for 21, 22 months. And each day there's something more atrocious and horrific than the previous day. And yet it continues on just as it has since October 8th.
Freddy, how much responsibility do you think the international community bear now? Because there's been these reports of starvation, the rising death toll. Every single day that number is going up and up. So what do the international community need to do?
Well, we've seen another statement today. The United Kingdom has joined a statement of, I think, 25 nations, pretty and unequivocally condemning Israel and pretty unequivocally calling for an immediate ceasefire and an end to the conflict. The problem is we've seen quite a lot of these statements in the last few months, 22 months, as you said, and it doesn't seem to have any impact on the dynamics of the conflict because Israel doesn't seem to be checked by international warnings. I think what might change now is that America, which is the only country that really can act as a brake on Israel's operations, is concerned and angry. I think last week, the Syrian strikes, there are reports from inside the Trump administration that Trump was very, very upset and distressed that Netanyahu had sort of conducted these strikes on Syria, which is another front in Israel's multi-fronted war. And there's a feeling among Trump officials, and including perhaps Donald Trump himself, that Netanyahu is out of control and that he's behaving recklessly and in a way that destabilizes the region. If America is able to increase its pressure on Israel, that could have some resolution on the conflict. That could help end the conflict. At the moment, though, I can't see how kind of just statements from the international community will do anything because we've seen so many.
The external factors are one thing, I guess, Michael, but the safe zones that we're hearing so much about within Gaza seem to become fewer and fewer. 12% of the territory is now what's considered to be, and I use this very lightly, a safe zone. And that is dwindling every single day. Surely the concern, and as Freddie mentioned there, the onus is on the international community to now do something that's going to intervene here to say we need more space or we do need an actual genuine safe zone that is not going to be bombarded.
Yeah, and as Freddie said, there was a statement that was put out today by a couple of dozen nations. It was a disappointing statement, not in the language, but it came from the foreign ministers. It didn't come from the heads of states. And I think that the international community can do all it wants. But again, as Freddie said, I think it all comes down to Donald Trump and America. And if they can tell Benjamin Netanyahu, this is the end, this is where it stops, you need a ceasefire deal by this date, that is the only way that I think Netanyahu will stop.
Freddie, there's no clear end in sight, it seems, and even though Michael referenced, we're obviously at these stalled ceasefire negotiations. What do you think the long-term consequences would be, both for Israel and for Gaza, of this operation?
Well, the long-term consequences for Israel are hard to fathom. I mean, some people on the kind of occasionally anti-Semitic, paranoid side of the political equation think that Israel is trying to establish a greater Israel dramatically and suddenly. I'm not sure that's entirely clear, but it is hard to see exactly what they think they can achieve. They can't kill every person in the region who they consider might potentially one day be a threat. Therefore, they are, as everybody has said repeatedly, they are creating future generations of threats against themselves. So their long-term strategy is unclear. I also think Israel on the international stage is increasingly becoming a pariah. And some Israelis might not mind about that. They might think the international community is biased against them and soft and so on. But I think it's undeniable now that not just in Europe, but also increasingly in America too, Israel is seen as a dangerous country and an unreliable friend by countries that did consider it an ally in the past. So I think the long-term consequences are Israel being increasingly alienated on the international stage, although perhaps less alienated, interestingly, in the actual region itself, given the alliances that it's forming with some of the Gulf states.
And Michael, just before we move on this, we're seeing the humanitarian crisis worsen. 19 people in the last 24 hours have died of starvation. It's an unusual tactic to go in on the ground on an offensive move in an area where we're hearing there are Israeli hostages being kept at the moment. Seems like an unusual tactic from the Israeli forces.
Yeah, and it's something that Benjamin Netanyahu is having to face with criticism back home. The hostages, the families are asking the exact same question. What is going on? How is this helping us bring the hostages, both the fallen and the living, back home?
Thank you both very much for your thoughts on that. We'll move on to our next story. Car company Stellantis claimed that President Trump says tariffs have cost them around $350 million. The automobile maker is responsible for brands like Vauxhall, Jeep and Fiat. They've been hit by a 25% tariff on imports to the US. Their total shipments to North America are also down by 25% in the last 3 months, and sales have fallen by 10%. Freddy, first to you on this. Was this inevitable? Stellantis is based in the Netherlands. Do you think you're going to see them make a move to the US as a result of this?
Well, yes, I think it's very possible that they will up their operations. I believe they already have a presence in the US. They own Ram trucks. I think they make them there. But you will certainly see Stellantis and probably other companies too in the next few months, considering a big shift of manufacturing operations into the US, just because Donald Trump isn't budging on the car tariffs. He may be budging on other tariffs. He may be softening some. He may be pausing many. But on car tariffs, he seems very resolute. And that's why you see the price of Ford, an American car manufacturer, going up this year. And you see other companies struggling. Jaguar Land Rover announced quite a few job losses last week. And there's no way that these car companies cannot suffer, these international car companies cannot suffer as a result of Donald Trump's tariffs. And I think Stellantis are particularly vulnerable because they're based in the Netherlands, but they are very much an international global car company. And so these tariffs are almost designed to hurt them for the benefit of American-made, America-first manufacturing.
Michael, these are still very new tariffs, and we know that the game is a long game here, and we've heard Trump's administration say this many, many times over. Could there be a settling down? Could there be a commonality and a middle ground that maybe could be reached here in order to get these imports back up again?
I don't think that matters to Donald Trump. I think he's focused on tariffs since the 80s. We know he's spoken about tariffs. It's one of his 3 favorite words, he said. And he isn't going to change course, I think, much like with the whole Epstein file situation. When his base is affected by the tariffs, by the price of cars, that's when I think we could see maybe a softening. But unless there's a drastic change, he's not going to be running again. This is his last campaign. I don't think he has to worry about making sure that he's in a good position for the next election. I also believe that he doesn't have any great loyalty to the Republican Party. And traditionally, an outgoing president would be asked to make sure they continue to toe the party line so that the next guy has an opportunity to win. And I don't think Donald Trump is too involved in those sorts of conversations. He's going to run the Republican Party the way that he wants. And that means that if he thinks tariffs are good, if he thinks a 50% tariff on Brazil is good because he doesn't like the way they're treating their former president, then that's what he's going to do.
Freddie, we're 6 months in from the president taking office, which was just yesterday on the 20th of January. So you were there for that. You saw it all play out. You followed the story right through until now. On Michael's comment, Trump doesn't care if people are meeting common ground or not. What do you think? Does President Trump care about finding some solution to this tariff problem?
Oh, I think he does care a little bit. I think it is amazing to think it's been 6 months. As a journalist, it feels like it's been a decade, just because there's so much has happened every day in the Trump administration. I think on the future, I mean, yes, he doesn't have to be re-elected unless, of course, he decides to run again, which is always possible, although I think unlikely. But he does have to think about the midterms. And even if he doesn't care that much about the future of the Republican Party, he does care about the threat of impeachment again if he doesn't have the House at the end of next year. And I do think he does. He will need the economy to settle. At the moment, the word in America is that Wall Street's very happy with the economy. Stock prices are going up in spite of the tariffs. But voters aren't really feeling the joint yet. Trump urgently needs voters to feel that they are entering what he promised, which is a golden age. And he needs to do that before the midterms come about. So I think that's going to be preeminent on his mind. And that's why you're seeing slight change in tone, I think, from the administration since that first 100 days where he just seemed to be turning the world upside down every day.
Many critics, Freddy, as well, in the first 6 months of his position in office. One of those critics, Ellen DeGeneres, has now been talking about her move, leaving the US, heading to the UK. She's spoken publicly about it for the first time. What has she said?
Well, she said she didn't like living in Trump's America, which is a lot of Hollywood lovies and celebrities feel that way. And she said she didn't feel comfortable about gay rights as a lesbian woman in America. I find that a little bit unfair on Trump. I think there's lots of things you can criticize about Donald Trump, but I don't think you can reasonably suggest that gay and lesbian couples are going to suffer serious persecution under Donald Trump. On the contrary, he's actually very pro. I think he has a lot of gay appointees in his administration, and he's very pro them. He's one source in Washington I know calls him America's first gay president, which is obviously a little bit of an odd thing to call him, but nonetheless, it shows that he's not this sort of homophobe or whatever you want to call him. But Ellen DeGeneres, I think, is just she's retreated to the Cotswold, where she was already living there part time. And actually, at the Spectator, we broke quite a funny story the other day, which is that J.D. Vance, the vice president, who Ellen DeGeneres hates possibly even more than she hates Donald Trump, he's looking to rent a place in the Cotswolds this summer or perhaps in September. And it's quite funny if he ends up being on the next door farm to Ellen DeGeneres, who escaped America to escape him.
Michael, obviously Ellen went out in, I'm not going to call it a blaze of glory, but there was a lot of controversy surrounding her show as she exited from that, and there was reasons behind that and accusations of bullying on the set of her show. So do you think she's maybe falling back on Trump as the excuse, but the actual reason may be somewhat different?
So I think I might be a little bit more sensitive to this than Freddie. I believe that you don't have to be speaking out about something to be for something. And I think the critics of Donald Trump will say that he allows things to be said and he allows things to happen under his watch. He allows various groups to speak out and there are no repercussions. And I think that that environment could be one of the issues that someone like Ellen is facing. But she, of course, went through her own sort of persona non grata experience in the latter days of her daytime talk show because of nothing that had to do with her sexuality. It was just because, by all accounts, it was a bit of a toxic workplace. Now, I think that leaving your home country, you get a better perspective. And is she in a better place now? She might feel like a different environment is a better place, and that's why she feels comfortable.
And she's making headlines again, which I think is a win for Ellen for sure. Thank you both, Freddy and Michael, for your thoughts on that. Let's move to our next story. To Japan now, where the country's Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, says he will stay in office. That's despite suffering a major defeat in the upper house elections over the weekend. His career hangs in the balance and he faces the prospect of a no-confidence vote. In contrast, the far-right party, Sanseito, has emerged as one of the biggest election successes. It's gone ahead and won 14 seats. Michael, we've seen far-right parties making huge ground just across Europe. Now we're seeing it here in Japan as well, mimicking the EU perhaps.
So I think because of the popularity of social media, countries around the world will see what has worked in the guiding light. And I think we still see so much goodness that exists in America that the world looks to that superpower for ideas and inspirations. And because of the success that Donald Trump has had when it comes to changing the conversation, when it comes to attacking his opponents, when it comes to trying to defend his base, I think a country like Sanseito has seen this, and they've used that to their advantage. And their strength grew from YouTube videos during the pandemic. Now, I lived in Japan for many years in the late 80s, early 90s, and that was at the height of the salaryman lifestyle. And I do know that the youth in Japan have traditionally struggled as they've come of age because there is such a structure to make sure that everybody is conforming. And what this Sanseito party has done is given at least a glimmer of hope to some people that there is a different way aside from the LDP. What's amazing about the LDP is that since occupation ended in 1955, there have been 32 Japanese prime ministers. 25 of them have been LDP. They have had a stranglehold on the political system in Japan for so long. And I think people are starting to wonder if there is a different way. Because of the strength of social media, they see how things are changing around the world when there is a right-leaning party elected. And maybe some of the Japanese are thinking, is this perhaps our time?
Well, he's defeated but not out. Freddie, the current Japanese Prime Minister said he's going to stay on. He wants to oversee these Trump tariffs, the rising consumer prices as well. Is a more right-winged, aligned leader maybe a better fit for a stronger relationship with Trump from what we've seen so far in other deals that have been reached?
It does seem in certain cases that Trump gets on better with a sort of hard man on the right. Viktor Orban, he seems to have a good relationship with. Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he liked very, very much. And in fact, a lot of Trump economics are modeled on Abenomics. But it's not necessarily true. I mean, Trump's unpredictable. I mean, he seems to really like Keir Starmer, who's a socialist prime minister for Britain. So you can't really judge it. In terms of comparing the two phenomena, I do think that immigration is the issue in politics, Western politics, certainly at the moment. And Japan is a very low immigration society, but has seen a rather sharp increase in the last decade. And I think you're seeing a reaction to that in the success of the Japanese hard right, or far right, if you want to call it that.
And we're hearing this, what they're referring to as a silent invasion of foreigners in the Japanese first agenda that's there as well. I guess, Michael, there is a regional influence to take into consideration here as well, growing tensions with China, with North Korea. A shift to the right, could that maybe destabilise things in the region, as somebody who's an expert having lived there for so many years?
So a shift to the right definitely could be an issue, but we're talking about so few seats having been won at this point. I would be concerned maybe a generation or two from now if things continue down this road. You know, Japan doesn't have historically the best relationships with its neighbors. Certainly China, the Koreans, those are the two big neighbors for the Japanese. And they have some real issues with the way the Japanese treated, especially the Chinese, during and before the Second World War. So I think that if the Japanese go too far right, it's definitely going to be an issue for its neighbors.
Well, several places have gone very far right. Before we move on, Freddie, I want to throw to you on this. The rise of Sanseito here, I mean, there's a broader political trend that we're seeing. We've seen it in the UK as well, when we've had a Nigel Farage trove support. Is this unique in Asia just to Japan, do you think, because of its social and demographic challenges? Or do you think we're going to see many more countries get on board the right-wing train?
I think you see different manifestations of the same phenomenon, which is an alarm about immigration, a concern about the strength of borders. And in Japan, it takes on very different qualities because the country is so different. It's a much more conservative society. I mean, their idea of high immigration is what a European would regard as sort of almost immigrant zero in comparison. So, yeah, it takes on very different qualities. And also there's this interesting element of a kind of return of Japanese militarism in some political rhetoric in Japan, which is it's a dramatic change for Japan, which has had this very strong pacifist constitution, pacifist system for a very long time.
Michael, I want to very quickly touch on something that I know is happening in the UK right now, and you mentioned it briefly at the first of the onset of this. Sanseito have seen a huge rise in popularity because of the fact that they're uploading videos on social media platforms, which is a very young demographic who are reaching these videos. Similarly now, with the voting age in the UK being reduced to 16, do you think we're going to see far more right-wing seats being won in the upcoming elections, mainly because a large proportion of the people who will now be voting are being said and led by what they're seeing on social media?
So yes and no. I definitely think that social media is going to play a bigger role. I don't think it will necessarily favor right-wing people. I think if you look at New York mayoral candidate Mamdani and the success that he had and why he was so prevalent in so many people's minds is because of his great instincts on social media. The stories that he would tell, he would not have to worry about that legacy media type approach where you can't do that. He would be the one, and I've listened to podcasts where his PR team have talked specifically about how he was there in those rooms, leading those ideas, talking about what we should do. Maybe it would be fine-tuned a little bit by the experts, but it was because of his instincts. So I think what we're seeing now from this year forward, you're going to have more politicians who are probably going to have less experience politically, but they're going to have more success on social media platforms. And that's going to give them that base to grow.
Similarly, Freddy, to you, and where it's a closer to home story, the voting age been reduced down to 16. A very impressionable age, you might think, for young voters who will be eligible to vote in the next general elections there. Could you see a sway towards the right, a huge sway towards the right, more so than we saw in the recent local elections?
Well, polling suggests that Reform are doing better than Labour would have hoped among that 16 to 17-year-old bracket. But I think Labour still have a significant majority of their votes. So it's a clear piece of gerrymandering for Labour. They're giving votes to people who are likely to vote Labour. However, you are right to point towards this interesting phenomenon of particularly young men becoming more right-wing online. And actually what we're seeing is the gender divide that is increasing in politics throughout all age groups is really increasing among young people. So you're getting effectively politics of sex as in gender, breaking out over all sorts of issues. And that is, I think, one of the most interesting and terrifying impacts of social media, is that it's sort of pitting men and women against each other politically.
Freddy, Michael, thank you both for your thoughts on that. And let's move on to another story. The boss of budget airline Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, has said it may increase workers' bonuses for pointing out passengers with oversized luggage. Ryanair already rewards its staff with €1.50 to intercept large bags on board, but now they're looking to increase this. Speaking earlier this morning, Michael O'Leary said that most passengers do abide by the current rules, but those who don't delay the boarding. Freddy, what do you make of this? Is it a big enough incentive? Currently, it's at €1.50 for pointing out an oversized baggage. No idea on what the new figure is going to be, but will that be enough to make staff go, hold on a second, let's get this bag down and check the weight?
It's sort of awful and brilliant at the same time, isn't it? Michael O'Leary he's a sort of demon PR man who through campaigning almost negatively, he manages to draw attention to his brand and his company. I mean, obviously, there's nothing more annoying than having your luggage taken away from you because it doesn't fit into some ridiculously small grid. And I can, there's nothing more annoying than the idea of staff being financially incentivized to catch you out. So it'll annoy a lot of people, but I think if you sign up to fly with Ryanair, you know what you're getting, and that's why it's so cheap.
Michael, Ryanair's profits are gone through the roof, and we've seen this. It's after-tax profits, €820 million for that period, which is incredible. Do you think they should maybe be passing on some of that goodwill to their loyal customers who are using them week in, week out?
I don't think if you're a loyal customer, you would expect that. That's not the way that airline operates, and you know that going in. I think there is, as Freddie said, there's a beauty and a horror in the way that this is presented. And also, the group CEO himself said that 99.9% of the passengers abide by the rules correctly. So he has a business that is only having to deal with 0.1% of his passengers. Now, that's not a big deal. I think this is, I'm going to be cynical, but I think I'm also going to be truthful. I think this is just a great PR move on his part to get the airline talking, or to get people talking, as we're doing, about his airline. And it's an opportunity to also talk about all the other wonderful things. And I think if you are, I looked it up, their longest flight is only 6 hours from Eastern Europe to the Canary Islands. So if I'm going somewhere for 6 hours and I'm getting from A to B safely, that's pretty much all I care about. And maybe I'll even go for the standing room that may become a reality at some point.
So apparently approved, pending EU approvals, and Ryanair, I'm sure, will be the first airline to introduce something similar to that, because Michael O'Leary and Freddie, Michael O'Leary has said previously, if he could make them stand on board, he could. Now we're seeing a prototype which has been introduced, and pending EU approval could be something we see in cabin in the next 12 to even 24 months. He said before previously he would happily charge people to use the bathroom on board if he was given the opportunity, but EU rules and regulations don't allow that. Now the EU is saying you have to allow somebody to bring on board a small bag with them. So is Michael O'Leary simply looking to try and make sure that Ryanair are hitting the headlines once again with a story like this?
I mean, probably, yes. He's been doing it for a very long time. He's extremely good at attracting attention for his company. And you have to acknowledge that his company is very, very good at what it does, which is an efficient, low-cost airline where you know as a passenger you're going to be treated like cattle. I love the idea of having to stand up for a flight. I think that's insane. I'd almost do it just to see what it's like. But I think, no, he has a company that is very effective at what it does, and it has beaten off a lot of its rivals.
Michael, if Ryanair do this, which of course I've no doubt that they will, they run the risk of maybe other competitors coming in and saying, right, we like this idea, let's do the same as well. Are they either saving themselves, or are they putting themselves and pitting themselves against other low-cost airlines like EasyJet when they do a rule introduction like this?
So I'm a big sports fan, and one of the great things about the sporting community, you know, you take Major League Baseball or you take the National Hockey League, and what happens is there are trends. And whoever gets on top of that trend first is the one that's probably going to be successful quickly. But the others have an opportunity to assess, see what worked, what didn't work, what's going to work in the future, and then they're able to pick and choose. So they can, the smart competitors will look at Ryanair as a bit of a guinea pig. Let them try it, and then we can stand back and we can pick and choose the things that we like without having to go through some of the circus maneuvers that Michael O'Leary likes to go through.
Freddie, this is putting the onus on the staff to do this. And as we said, it's a financial incentive on the staff to say, right, you are overweight on your baggage, and we're going to charge you extra as a result, and they'll be paid directly for that as a bonus incentive. What if Michael O'Leary, and I don't rule this out, and again, this is just speculation, what if he gave incentives to other passengers in order to report people who've got oversized baggage? Do you think that would potentially work, and would you be a rat and rat people out on a situation like that, Freddie?
I would not rat. I'd like to think that I would not rat, even if there was a good financial incentive. I'd like to think that I'd not rat, because I think that's very bad form. I think it's a sort of crazy thing they might try and do. I don't see why customers should have to join in on the kind of airline's drive to make the plane lighter. I think I would, if I were in a position where I could dob someone in for, let's say, 50% off my next Ryanair flight, I suppose I would be tempted, but I'd like to think I wouldn't.
Michael, similarly, I have to ask you, if it was a free meal on board or extra legroom seat, would Michael Jabri Pickett be willing to rat somebody out?
No, like Freddie, I'd like to think that I wouldn't. But I have an idea for Michael O'Leary. If he really wants to generate a bit of publicity, good and bad, is start charging not for extra baggage, but start charging people for how much they weigh.
A whole other conversation to take it into, but we have briefly mentioned there is obviously no difference in that, because if your bag is 20 kilos or it's under 20 kilos and the passenger is 110, you're 70, should you be allowed the difference in weight on that? And I think risky territory, Freddie, if you were to mention that to Michael O'Leary, I've no doubt that he would implement something similar if he was legally allowed to do that.
Well, in the age of Ozempic and Manjaro, it might be increasingly irrelevant.
I feel like there's a bigger conversation to be had about that unfortunately we do not have time for this evening, because we are moving on. Michael and Freddie, you both have come up with some quirky stories of the day. First, Michael, we'll switch to you on this. Tell us about a Nazi document that's got links to Argentina. What's this about?
So Argentina has a president who is trying to help the country come to grips with its complicated history around Nazis. Now, a little bit of background. So Argentina declared war on Germany in March 1945. A month later, Hitler was dead. So by doing that, they sort of declared their allegiance. Today, Argentina has the largest Jewish community in Latin America. There are 200,000 Jews there. So what's happened recently is that in the storage archival basement of the Supreme Court building, they have found Nazi labor organization membership booklets, 5,000 of them. Now, the Supreme Court statement says that those came in 1941 on a Japanese ship from the German embassy in Tokyo. Critics are saying that's probably not the case. Now, Argentina before and during the Second World War were dealing with a lot of banned Nazi sympathetic organizations. So the suspicion is that perhaps these membership booklets were actually from Argentina. What's going to be interesting moving forward is that as the president tries to come to grips with the country's complicated history, and you have to remember that Joseph Mengele was there, Adolf
famously, dozens of Nazi war criminals were given harbour there, right?
Indeed. Adolf Eichmann, of course, was captured by the Mossad in Argentina and brought back to be sentenced, stand trial, and then be sentenced and hanged. So the country is trying to come to grips with this complicated history, and these documents are just bringing some of those issues to the surface. So over the course of the next several months, I think the conversations will be more interesting as both sides try to learn a little bit more about what the country did and what they could have done differently.
Freddie, we'll move on to your story. That is a fascinating story, Michael. Freddie, yours is about a British barber who was wrongly kidnapped, it seems.
Yes. A Belgian barber called Quentin Sedledrick, I'm not pronouncing that right, but he was thought to have, but his kidnappers, they lured him to a flat in Shepherd's Bush, and they thought that he had £500,000 worth of cryptocurrency. Because of what they'd seen on social media. That element of the story is a bit unclear. But it's a nasty story, but it's got a happy ending. They beat him up a bit and tried to get his password out of him, and then they finally realised that he only had £6.71, I think it was, in his account. At which point, one of his kidnappers reportedly said, "Are you kidding me?" And they finally, after a big ordeal in which they tried to get other amounts of money, I think they finally got £2,000 off him. And then they put him onto a train back to Belgium. The reason the story grabbed my attention is it just shows the craziness of cryptocurrency and the crypto world we're living in, where money is increasingly ethereal and nobody really knows whether someone's a multi-billionaire or is just pretending to be one online. And so the art of kidnapping is becoming harder. And we're seeing more and more of these crypto kidnappings, some of them awful. And actually, people are having vast fortunes stolen. But quite often it's a case of mistaken identity, because the nature of crypto, the word means hidden, is that it is hidden.
And I think it's one of those things, and Michael, I'll pass to you on this very quickly before we wrap up, but I think people who worked in crypto tend to have maybe a lifestyle that's been shown on Instagram and social media, and then the label that they are a crypto bro, but the reality behind it might be, in fact, quite different. And I think that's where the risk runs in. This person may be flaunting something that may not actually be true as a lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think that that's true with just about anybody on social media who might be an influencer or who might want to project something that we know is not necessarily the truth. How many people would we see, especially in Dubai, posing in front of a Lamborghini trying to put that off as maybe that's one of their vehicles?
I think my parents normally say fur coat, no underwear. Thank you to both of our guests for today, to Michael Jabri Pickett, the Managing Director of This Is Dubai, and the Deputy Editor of Spectator, Freddie Gray, joining us live from the Isle of Wight. Thank you both very much. That's all from us on W News Extra. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on X. And GNT with Michael Prendergast. Michal Prendergast is on the way next. Thank you and goodbye.